Next up, we have Joe Caruso. Joe, I've followed his work for quite a few years. His first bestseller was The Power of Losing Control. Great lessons in there as well. But I tell you, the work that he's done that stuck out the most for me was the work on narratives. Joe has a newsletter and other things. And when I read the article on narrative, I reached right out to him. I said, Joe, this is the best work you've done. And that was, I don't know how many years ago that was, Joe. And now he's turned it into a really a great book on narrative, and without stealing his thunder, it really helps you understand how you need to frame things and be proactive about it. So I don't want to steal your thunder, Joe. Please take it away.
Hi, Bob. Am I on? Can
You're
you?
on.
All right, great. Hello. Wow, nice to hear Jennifer and nice to hear Mike prior to me. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. I do have notes because I also want to make sure I keep to my time. I like the format very much. So I'll get right to it. Um, there's going to be two main takeaways today for everybody. Hello. Number one is the necessity and the power of narrative in business. I'll be talking a lot about the power in the process of how the mind creates behavior, which creates outcome. And number two, the critical difference between strategy and narrative, because narrative is something completely different. So let's get started. Narrative is the algorithm of the mind. We're the stories we tell ourselves we are. And leaders who learn this, they know how to use narrative in their organization with their people, especially their leadership teams, to drive profit. Your company's narrative is what's driving your results, profit and loss. And you may have a great strategy, but the daily decisions that your people make, which are creating the money, is driven by narrative. This is a fact of human nature and the human mind. So let's get to how it works through a real life client story. Her name is Christine. Christine's the CEO of a large international multinational well-known business. We won't mention the name of the business. And during what I call a narrative alignment process with Christine and her company, I was asking Christine, tell me about the company you want to run. It's like someone who the old golf story when they ask the pro golfer here's what I'm doing wrong. Instead, the golfer says, show me how you want to swing. I was saying, tell me about the company you want to run, Christine. And finally, after a long thought, she says, I want to be the envy of the industry. I said, that's it. Tell me more about that. She goes, I want people who don't work here to want to work here. I want people who aren't our customers to want to be our customers. I want our competitors to worry about what we're going to do next. I said, that's it. Fantastic. That's a narrative that we can drive through the organization as a contextual way to approach every decision this organization makes. Now, my job was to find the best way to get that narrative deeply and indelibly into the minds of Christine's leadership team so that it would become the main context. And quite often, CEOs surround themselves with subject matter experts. And they call it a leadership team because it's the top subject matter expert in all the expertise required to run the organization. I titled my latest book, the one Bob was just referring to, it's just out in January. I titled it Narrative Wins, the special CEO edition, because it explains the science and it has a lot of real case studies in it about how leaders can use narrative to optimize, you'll know this one, people, strategy, execution, and cash. It takes those four decisions from scaling up and puts them on steroids. The fact is, you either know how narrative works in the individual and collective mind so you can use it, or it's using you. Because in your life and in your business, narrative is what drives results. Now, most CEOs and board of directors, I might add, are spending a lot of time working to optimize strategies. And that's great and important work. But the work can't stop there because we all know that strategy doesn't execute itself. Your people execute the strategies, and people don't behave logically. Watch the news. People don't behave logically as much as they behave to a narrative. So here's the real question. Not do we have the right strategy? You probably do. But are we as leaders using an aligned narrative to create the thinking and behaviors that are driving the outcomes in our company? Because if your company's even 5% misaligned on how it defines itself and how it leads, executes, you're losing real money. That's not a strategy problem. That's an expensive problem, and it's a narrative problem. So let's get back to the story of Christine and how we created an aligned narrative in her business. After the conversation with Christine about narrative, and once we had it defined, we had a big envy of the industry meeting where Christine talked to her group about this idea. And then I was going to meet with, as I do in these meetings, these visits, every leader she had to personally talk to them about how they're seeing themselves in their work. The first guy on my schedule was the COO. And I said, what's foremost on your mind today? And he said, oh my God, I have a major hire that I have to get in place. And if I don't get in place, I can't get to all this other stuff, this important stuff on my calendar. I got to hire somebody, Joe. I got to hire anybody. I paused. I said, I hear you, but let me ask you one question. You just got out of this big meeting with your CEO talking about becoming the envy of the industry. How does hiring just anybody make this company become the envy of the industry? He got quiet. He said, I guess it won't. But you did ask me what was foremost on my mind today, and that was it. No, he had a good point. Because remember, we behave to narrative. The foremost thing on his mind was his problem. I'm going to stick to my notes as much as I can, so I stick to time here. Then he said something, the most insightful thing he said in that moment. He said, I guess that's just how I determine my priorities. I try to solve my biggest problems first. Doesn't everybody, especially leaders. And that's when I took my opening. I said, his name was Mike. I said, Mike, after today's big meeting about being the envy of the industry, solving your big problems first, just to get them out of the way, doesn't sound like that's what your CEO is paying you to do. He said, you know, she's right. I want to be the envy of the industries too. I said, well, how can that inform your thinking and your decisions? That question is very important. Our narrative informs our thinking and our decisions. I'm on the phone all the day long with clients. Clients get 1 hour a week. I can't do more than 4 or 5 a day. And my opening question is, how's your mind today? They know they're going to hear it because I want them thinking about their mind and how their outcome is driven by their mind. That attachment is how narrative wins. It's now documented, by the way, that Christine's COO and that same group of subject matter experts that she surrounded herself with became the leadership team that made her company the envy of that industry. And I'm very happy and proud of that success story. Narrative is the algorithm of the mind. And like any good algorithm, narrative creates indelible patterns. Think of YouTube. And it creates indelible patterns and stories in our minds. Great leaders are what I call in my book quintessential leaders. They know this. Leaders like people that gave me these great quotes from my book. These are clients. It's narrative that drives people. When I wrote Narrative Wins with my co-authors, Dr. Curtis Bristol, world-class psychoanalyst from Washington, D.C., and Dr. Sean Mahoney, a Harvard-trained learning strategist, at the time was with a small company called Amazon Web Services. You might have heard of that. Narrative Wins quickly became a bestseller in January, right away, in the areas of communication and business. And I knew it would. It wasn't surprised. I didn't spend 10 years writing and researching this book because the world needed another business book. It doesn't. I wrote it because the basic human fact about how the mind decides what we do and how we sell and what we buy is unaddressed in most business books. Here's a very personal example of how I discovered narrative at a very young age. I was 18 years old and I was diagnosed with metastasized testicular incurable cancer. It was the doctors were very clear. There was no one ever cured of my disease. They had these wild chemotherapy, terrible programs that they would put people through that have it, trying to find a cure, but no one had ever been cured. So I clearly heard my doctor's prognosis and I didn't know what to do. So I started planning my funeral with my parents, which had to be very difficult for them. And I was talking to later my oncology nurse, and I was telling her about planning the funeral. And she said, Joe, you know, there's a lot of people working very hard around the world to cure testicular cancer. I'm one of them. And, you know, I believe that someday we're going to find a cure. And I believe that that day there's going to be someone who's going to be the first person cured. But if you decided it won't be you, it can't be. That was Jeannie. I'll never forget Jeannie. She changed my life because she helped me reframe the way I was thinking about cancer, my story in the narrative of cancer. I needed to find a new one, and she gave it to me. I decided that I'll either be the first one cured or I'll die trying. Instead of focusing on my funeral, I started focusing on my life and what I was eating and how I was doing and whether I was being positive every day. Narrative wins. It drives the behavior that creates the outcomes. And I'm here today live with you, Bob, and your scaling up group here today because of Jeannie. That's how powerful narrative can be when it's communicated correctly. I'm in my second life, and I've dedicated my second life to doing everything I can to help other people. People behave to narrative, and I use narrative in my work. I wrote a book about it. Since I agreed to do this program, I thought about how I could make the biggest difference, Bob, for you and all you folks out there. And so I made a decision, and I'm going to read this because I have to get this right. Because of my relationship with Bob, and I've known Bob for a long time, he's a very successful entrepreneur, sold his company, and now he's helping other companies be successful. And Bob is one of the most sincere and honest and good friends I've ever seen. He's a good guy. And I don't spend a lot of time with Bob. When I do, that's who I meet. So here's what I decided to do. I'm going to reserve a very limited number of private engagements, specifically for the companies in this group. My business model only allows me to do this, a few of these each year. So here's what I'm going to do. I've decided to commit to personally doing a 2-day narrative alignment like I did with Chris on site. This will be a similar program to Chris's program. The typical investment for me to do these is $35,000 a year. My business model does not, or $35,000 for the program. It doesn't, I can't do this all year. In about 2 minutes, I'm going to put up a QR code that's going to, you can use to apply for this program. But I want to use our time together to share one more nugget from the book before I do that. The framing that we use to define any problem is created by the boundaries of our thinking. Problem is unsolvable if we decide it is. Listen to this. How we define a problem determines all the solutions we've decided we can't consider. The problem is in the boundaries of our mind, or it's outside the boundaries of our mind. Now, I want to be clear about this. I get paid to solve problems, but I don't get paid to change people's minds. I can't change anybody's mind. I help people shift their narrative. And when that happens, they move the boundaries in their mind. And problems that were insurmountable become solvable. Let me relate how a CEO can use narrative to drive thinking. And if you've ever watched a movie, you've experienced this. One of my most fun clients, or the clients I had the most fun around, was the Academy of Motion Pictures. And what I mean by that is, yes, I got to attend the Academy Awards. It's a lot of fun. And all of the great directors I met in Hollywood that I spoke with agree with Ron Howard, who I quote in the book. Ron Howard's the director of great movies like Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, Rush, and many others. And I quote Ron in the book saying this: the number one job of a director is simple: drive the narrative forward. Great directors never forget that a film can have dozens of scenes, lots of subplots, great side stories, but if any of them don't serve to move that central narrative forward, it needs to get cut. Leaders, think about that in the context of your business. How many initiatives, hires, and meetings do you have that don't move the narrative forward? You don't scale strategy. The job's to tell the story, tighten the story, and amplify it. I'm going to run. I see Bob coming up. Am I done?
Yeah, I just have a couple of things I'd like to ask you and have you share with the group a little bit.
Can I get to that QR code
Sure,
and share
sure.
this real quickly with people? I can only offer it to a few, but I'm going to talk to everybody. I'm going to encourage you, take a picture of the QR code if you can, apply. This is a 2-day onsite for the companies that are serious about their growth.
Yeah,
Uh,
Joe, what we can do is why don't we send it out with the follow-on materials and anybody can contact you.
okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And I want
This
to I want to
before we go
close.
to before we go to the scaling up screen, can you just go back to Joe and I for a second, please?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. We'll send it out with the follow-up, Joe.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so a couple things for everybody. I really like the your work, Joe. As I said, this narrative stuff. And can you go back to the screen that shares Joe and I for a minute? Thanks. To me, I just love this content, and remember that article you wrote in the book just reinforces even more. And for everybody on the call, think of it in multiple faceted, right? So it's the stories you tell yourself. Everybody has their crisis of confidence from time to time. At least I do once in a while. Not often, fortunately, but I remember a friend of mine telling me it's simple. Just write down positive affirmations about yourself that you know are true, and read them every morning. And I did that, and boy, it snaps your head right out of it because we are the stories we tell ourselves. So at a personal level, keep that in mind, right? You're on this because you're sharp and you want to learn, you want to get better. So keep control of that voice in your head. When it comes to your business, in scaling up, we use things like the one-page strategic plan to capture a vision of a business and where you want to be in your core values. And Joe, your work on narratives is right on with that because now we have to tell that story to the world and to our staff and to our team. So it's really interesting. And Joe, maybe talk about too the different scenarios, right? So there's your own personal narrative, there's the narrative of your company and what you want the world to see about your company, and then there's also situational things, right? A crisis comes up, or an opportunity comes up, or you have a new product launch, right? So talk about that in a little bit, and how to really amplify that effect by getting that narrative right and downstreaming it.
Absolutely. The alignment of that narrative is critical. Everybody has this, brings themselves, the story of themselves to work. Your COO, your CEO, your marketing person, everybody, especially the marketing people, they're trying to align the story. The sales people are trying to get, this is who we are. What people have to do, Bob, is find themselves in your story. There has to be room for them. When you find yourself in a good movie, it's because every story in the movie spoke to you, about you. It's what you were talking about earlier, talking about kudos for people. And Jennifer and Mike talked about the different levels of employees. Aligning the narrative of the organization so that someone finds themselves in it creates, almost eliminates a need for marketing, almost makes the sales easy. They're calling you. That's what a strong narrative does. If you find yourself having to push and sell and manage people, the narrative's not aligned, because leadership isn't management. Management is on time, this specific subject, getting this done. It's here's our key things we have to do this week and this month and this quarter. That's management, and that's important. But leadership is already having the context of why I should think this way. And when you have personal crisis, Bob, you're very good at saying to yourself, thinking this way isn't helping me. I need to think about it this way. Absolutely.